Julia sat there trying to steady her breath, but her eyes kept filling up because she knew the moment she spoke, everything would change. The pregnancy she had guarded for months, the one shaped by fear and silence, was about to be pulled into the light. Viewers only saw a trembling woman on a couch. What they did not see was the weight of every miscarriage, every sleepless night, and every secret she carried alone. Brandon waited beside her with a smile he tried to hide, almost as if he felt guilty for being excited. She could not match that excitement. Her mind was already racing through everything that might go wrong the moment they said the words out loud. You are watching TLC Drama Live. I am Sabrina. Before I take you deeper into Julia's emotional storm, make sure you subscribe and tell me in the comments how you felt watching her struggle to say one simple sentence. Her fear was so real that even the cast went silent. Julia pressed her palms together so tightly her knuckles turned white. She whispered to a producer that she did not know if she could do this. She said the last time she spoke about hoping for a baby, the hope had disappeared in a single painful moment. That memory lived under her skin. Brandon touched her shoulder, trying to ground her. For him, sharing the news felt like a normal milestone. For her, it felt like opening the door to disaster. Their emotional rhythms were completely different, and she knew it. She even apologized to him quietly, as if her terror was an inconvenience. She looked at the cameras with this fragile half-smile that kept breaking at the edges. The cast waited. The room felt tight. She kept blinking fast, trying to stop the tears before they blurred her vision. Her body language made one thing clear. She was not hiding the pregnancy out of drama. She was hiding it because saying the words felt unsafe. Every breath seemed like a test. She had survived months of fear in silence. Speaking was the part she feared most. This is where everything in their story shifts, and the next moment will hit harder than she expects. Julia tried to keep her breathing steady, but the moment the host said they were next, a wave of panic tightened her entire posture. Her hand reached for anything she could grip, a cushion, a sleeve, her own fingers, anything that might keep her from falling apart. Every detail of her face showed how heavy the secret had become. Her chin shook, her shoulders curled inward. Her eyes kept darting toward the exit like she was searching for one last moment of safety before everything became public. Brandon whispered that she was doing fine. She nodded even though she did not believe it. The cameras were locked on her. That did not help. The lights were warm enough to make anyone uncomfortable, but for her, they seemed to expose every part of the fear she had been hiding. Pregnancy hormones did not explain this level of tension. Her entire body looked tired from months of worry she had, never spoken aloud. She closed her eyes for a second. That was the only moment she looked peaceful, but the peace broke instantly when the host asked how they had been doing. Her eyes opened and filled again. Her voice was quiet at first. Too quiet for someone about to share good news. She kept rubbing her thumb against her palm like she was counting each fear one at a time. Losing the baby again. Hearing silence instead of movement. Saying the wrong thing. Feeling the heartbreak she had already lived through more than once. Every thought pushed her deeper into herself. The entire cast watched her like they were afraid of doing anything that might make her shut down completely. Brandon sat straighter when she tried to speak. He stayed patient, but there was a hint of guilt in the way he looked at her. He knew he wanted to celebrate. He also knew she felt unsafe doing anything that looked like celebrating. That gap between them created a pressure neither of them mentioned on camera. The audience felt it anyway. His excitement sat beside her fear, and neither emotion knew how to make space for the other. She wiped her cheek again, almost frustrated with herself. She whispered that she had never been this scared in her life, not during any argument, not during any fight with the parents, not even when they struggled in the past. This moment was different. This was a moment where joy and terror kept crashing into each other so fast she could not tell which one she was supposed to feel. Her next confession is the one that changes how everyone in the room sees her, and it will push the emotional tension even higher. Julia finally pushed out the words she had been holding back, and the room shifted. She said they had been trying for a long time, and everyone nodded because they already knew about the fertility struggles. But then her voice cracked, and the tone changed. She said the word miscarriages, not once, but in a way that made it clear she had lived through more than one loss. The cast inhaled sharply. Even the host froze. It was the kind of silence that appears only when people hear something heavier than they expected. Her eyes stayed down when she explained that each loss had carved out a fear she did not know how to silence. She said she woke up every morning waiting to feel movement, because that was the only thing that told her she had not lost the baby again. She said she checked so often she felt like she was living hour to hour instead of day to day. That detail pulled everything into focus. Her secrecy was not about drama, it was about survival. She believed that if she spoke too soon, the pain would return. In her mind, keeping quiet made the pregnancy safer. Brandon's face softened the moment she said all this in front of the cast. He already knew what they had been through, but hearing her say it out loud seemed to hit him differently. He kept looking at her like he wanted to take some of the fear away, but he had no idea how. He knew she was carrying the emotional weight of the pregnancy while he had been carrying the excitement. That imbalance had created a tension they never admitted, not even to each other. Julia took a deep breath before saying she was already 6 months along. The cast reacted instantly. Some gasped, some sat back. Some looked confused that she had made it this far without telling anyone. She did not blame them for being surprised. She blamed herself for feeling scared every time she imagined sharing the news. Her hands shook when she said it. 6 months should have felt like safety. For her, it felt like a countdown she did not control. She tried to explain why she believed silence protected her. She said every time she had shared hope in the past, the hope disappeared. That pattern attached fear to her voice. She said speaking was harder than pregnancy itself. The cast exchanged looks, unsure if they should comfort her or give her space. But the emotional truth was clear. She was not overwhelmed by pregnancy, she was overwhelmed by memory. Brandon started to speak, but she reached for his hand before he could. Not to stop him, to steady herself. She said she wanted to talk, she wanted to feel normal about this pregnancy. She wanted joy, but her body had learned fear so deeply that joy felt suspicious. That line hit everyone watching. You could see it in their eyes. They understood now why she looked like she was holding onto the couch for stability. What she says next will pull the emotional curtain back even further, and the cast will see a side of her they were not prepared for. The cast needed a moment to process everything she had poured out. They kept glancing at each other, trying to figure out how to respond without adding pressure. You could feel the shift in the room. Julia wiped her face again, but this time she looked almost embarrassed, like she thought she had shared too much. She kept apologizing under her breath, even though no one asked her to explain anything. That habit showed how much stress she had carried alone. She assumed every emotion made her a burden. One of the cast members stepped forward first. They congratulated her softly, almost like they did not want to startle her. Then others followed. The reactions were warm, kind, and careful. Julia smiled at them with this shaky relief, the kind a person gives when they know someone means well, but the fear has not left their body yet. Brandon watched all of this with a quiet pride. He had waited months for this moment, and he seemed grateful that others were finally holding some of the emotional load with him. But when the congratulations settled, the questions began. Not harsh questions, not invasive questions. They were trying to understand why she kept something so huge from everyone, especially when so many of them had become close over the years. Julia's breaths grew shallow again. The fear rose as quickly as it had faded. She admitted that she did not feel safe sharing anything because she thought speaking out loud would bring the same pain they faced before. She said the worst part was waiting for kicks. Every morning she woke up afraid the silence meant she had lost the baby again. The cast looked stunned. Some covered their mouths. Some nodded, trying to show her she was not alone in that fear. But there was a second layer under their reactions. They were also shocked that neither of their families knew. Julia expected that question before they even asked it. She said both sets of parents would react strongly, but for different reasons. Her parents would worry. Brandon's parents would get involved in ways she could no longer handle. Her voice softened when she said she wanted to protect her peace during this pregnancy. She said her heart could not handle any more stress, and she knew sharing the news would bring more attention than she wanted. She did not say it loudly, but every word carried weight. She said she needed quiet to keep herself together. She said she needed a bubble before she lost control again. Even the cast could see how tightly she still held everything inside. The room felt heavier when someone asked whether keeping the secret had helped or hurt her. She hesitated. That silence was louder than the question. Then she whispered that she did not know anymore because the fear had grown even sharper in her solitude. Brandon touched her knee gently. She leaned toward him without thinking, almost as if her body finally admitted she needed support. The next part of her story will bring another wave of tension, because the biggest emotional divide in this pregnancy is about to show itself. Brandon finally spoke with a careful tone, and the contrast between them became impossible to ignore. He said he had been excited from the beginning. He said he wanted to share the news, to celebrate, to let people in. His voice carried hope, but it also carried something else. a quiet frustration that he tried to hide. Julia kept her eyes down like she already knew what he was feeling. She said she understood his excitement, but every time he brought up telling someone, she felt her stomach drop. Her brain linked sharing with loss. She said that fear controlled her more than she wanted to admit. She explained that she worried the pregnancy would disappear the moment people acknowledged it. She said she felt cursed by the timing of their past losses. Every time she had said the words out loud, the story ended badly. So this time she kept quiet and tried to trick her heart into believing silence was protection. Brandon listened closely. He did not interrupt, but he swallowed hard, and you could see the conflict in his expression. He wanted to reassure her, but he also wanted to tell the world. He had been carrying two emotions at once, and those emotions had nowhere to settle. Julia rubbed her hands together while she talked. She said she knew she was being irrational, but fear does not listen to logic during pregnancy. She said she kept thinking she would wake up and everything would be gone again. She said it happened before, and the memory lived in her body. That sentence cracked her voice. Brandon's face softened instantly. He placed his hand on her back, and she leaned into him in a way that showed how exhausted she was. She had been holding the secret like a shield, and even she did not know whether it was protecting her or trapping her. The cast sat quietly during all of this. No one tried to lighten the mood. No one changed the subject. They understood the weight of her truth, but someone eventually asked if she thought hiding the pregnancy from their families made things harder. Her head dropped. She said yes without hesitation. She said she felt guilty every day, but she also said she felt safer knowing no one's expectations could break her if something went wrong again. Brandon nodded slowly. He admitted they had been living in two different emotional worlds. He wanted openness. She wanted silence. He wanted joy. She wanted stability. That quiet acknowledgement added a new tension to the room. Not anger, not blame. Something deeper. It was the type of conflict that lives in couples who love each other but cannot meet each other at the same emotional height. Julia let out a shaky breath and said she feared that telling their families would pull her into fights she was not strong enough to face. She said it was not about past drama, it was about survival. The parents, especially Brandon's, had crossed boundaries before. They had walked into their home without knocking. They had pushed their opinions until she felt crushed. She did not want that energy near her pregnancy. What comes next will finally test that fear, because she will have no choice but to face the one boundary she never thought she would have to cross. Julia reached for her phone with hands that still trembled, but this time the fear mixed with something softer. She said she wanted to start with her parents. She said they worried about her, but they never pushed. The cast encouraged her gently. Brandon gave her a small nod. Even though she hesitated, her body language shifted, like she sensed this might finally bring a bit of relief after months of holding everything in. The call connected, and her parents appeared on the screen looking sleepy but alert the second they saw her face. It was late in Russia, but they didn't complain. They greeted her warmly. Julia couldn't hold back her smile. It was the first time her expression softened without fear dragging it down. She told them she had news. Her father joked that she probably ate too much, trying to keep the mood light. She shook her head and stood up, turning sideways so they could see her belly. For 1 second, they stayed quiet. Then her mother gasped, and her father's eyes widened with surprise that looked like joy fighting through disbelief. Their reaction hit Julia deeply. She started crying again. But it was a different cry this time. Not fear, not panic. It was pure release. She finally told them she was 6 months along, and instead of anger or confusion, they lit up with pride. Her mother's voice cracked with happiness. Her father laughed like he could not believe what he was seeing. They were overjoyed, not hurt about being told so late. They said they loved her. They said they trusted her. They said the timing did not matter as much as her well-being. Julia tried to apologize for hiding the news. Her parents stopped her immediately. They said they understood why she had been scared. They said they had seen her struggle in the past. They said she deserved a gentle pregnancy, whatever that looked like for her. Hearing that changed something in Julia's posture. Her shoulders loosened. Her breathing slowed. Her face softened until she looked lighter than she had in the entire episode. For the first time, she seemed able to believe she was allowed to feel safe. The cast watched all of this quietly. Some wiped their eyes. Even Brandon looked stunned at how much relief washed over her. You could tell he had been carrying the guilt of their secrecy too, and seeing her parents respond with so much love took some of that weight off both of them. When the call ended, Julia let out a long exhale. the kind that comes from finally dropping a load you should never have carried alone. She looked around at the room and gave a small smile. It was the first smile that didn't have fear hiding behind it. But that comfort didn't last long. Once the joy settled, the next reality returned. Brandon's parents were waiting. Production already had their video feed prepared. Julia's expression tightened again. Her breath shortened. Her hands began to twitch with that familiar nervous rhythm. She whispered that she wasn't ready for them. She said she knew this was going to be harder. She said the first call healed her. The second call might break her. The next reveal carries a different kind of risk, because this time the reaction will not be as simple or as gentle as the one she just lived through. Julia tried to hold on to the calm she felt after speaking to her parents, but the peace slipped away the moment she realized Ron and Betty were next. The difference was immediate. Her shoulders tightened. Her hands began to grip the edge of the seat. Even her breathing changed. It was sharp again, uneven, the same way it had been before she revealed anything. Brandon noticed and leaned in close, but she didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the screen where his parents would appear any second. The cast reacted too. They had seen her soften during the first call, and now they watched the tension crawl back over her body. One of them whispered that this was the real moment she feared. It was obvious without her saying a word. Her history with Ron and Betty carried its own emotional gravity. These were the people she, associated with pressure, criticism, and boundary issues that had already shaped her entire pregnancy experience. Production signaled that the call was ready. Brandon sat straighter, trying to show confidence for both of them. Julia pulled her hands into her lap and pressed her fingers together like she needed some kind of anchor. When Ron and Betty appeared on the screen, they looked hopeful and concerned at the same time. Betty jumped straight into emotion. She said they felt distant from Julia. She said they didn't know why she pulled away. She said she missed them and felt shut out. Hearing that made Julia's eyes drop again. She didn't want to start crying before she even spoke. Ron spoke next. His tone was calm but heavy. He said he wanted things to be good between all of them. He said he cared about both of them. He said the distance hurt. Julia nodded once, but she didn't lift her head. She didn't correct him. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She looked like someone who wanted connection, but didn't trust how to reach for it without losing her peace. Brandon took a breath and admitted they had been quiet lately. He said they needed space. He didn't mention the pregnancy yet, but the tension around the unspoken truth filled the room. Betty tried to lighten the moment by asking if anything happened. Julia blinked hard, and the cast exchanged glances. Everyone could see the fear building in her again. She seemed to shrink inside herself. The excitement she showed with her parents was gone. Now she looked like she was waiting for impact. Brandon's parents kept talking about wanting their relationship back. They talked about reconnecting. They talked about missing holidays together. To them, it was simple. To Julia, it was dangerous. She didn't want to open doors that had closed for a reason. Past experiences sat like warnings in her mind, each one reminding her how fragile her emotional state had been during the pregnancy. Brandon tried to guide the conversation gently, but Julia's silence said more than anything he could explain. She whispered that she wanted a relationship, but she needed boundaries. Her voice came out thin, like she wasn't sure she had the right to ask for anything. Betty nodded slowly, but the look in her eyes showed confusion. Maybe even hurt. This was the moment Julia had feared. The moment where her needs collided with their expectations. Nothing had been revealed yet, but you could feel the pressure building. The cast leaned forward. Brandon held Julia's hand. She squeezed his fingers like she was bracing herself. The truth was right there, sitting between them, waiting to break open the room. The next words she attempts to say will push the tension to its highest point, because once she starts, she can't take anything back. Ron leaned closer to the camera, trying to understand what Julia was struggling to say. His expression softened in a way that showed he sensed. Something heavier was hiding beneath her silence. Betty, on the other hand, kept shifting in her seat like she was waiting for a clear explanation. She said they had reached out. She said they tried to reconnect. She said they felt shut out without knowing why. Her words landed harder than she intended, and Julia's posture tightened again. Her fingers curled into her palms. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she said she wasn't good at sharing her feelings. She said Brandon could talk easily, but she couldn't. She said she hid things when she felt unsafe. That statement confused them. Betty frowned slightly, not out of anger, but out of not understanding. Ron nodded slowly, almost like he suspected there was more beneath the surface. The cast watched in complete silence. Everyone sensed the shift. The room carried this heavy pressure that made it hard to look away. Julia tried to speak again, but she kept stopping right as the words reached her throat. Brandon rubbed her back. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, trying to find the strength to say the truth she had been carrying for months. Ron told her they cared about her, and that line shook her. She looked up, eyes shining with a mix of grief and guilt. She said they didn't know everything she had gone through. Her voice broke midway. Betty straightened in her chair, trying to process what she meant. Her expression flickered between concern and confusion. She asked what Julia was talking about. The question hit Julia with a force that pushed her deeper into the emotional corner she feared. Brandon cleared his throat, ready to help her speak, but Julia lifted a hand. She wanted to say it herself. She wanted to stop hiding. She wanted to break the silence, even though her body reacted like the truth might hurt her all over again. She wiped her face quickly, as if she didn't want them to see how scared she was. She inhaled sharply and opened her mouth to speak, but the words tangled. Each second of hesitation stretched the tension until it felt like the entire room was holding breath with her. Ron leaned forward again, more serious now. He asked her gently to tell them what she meant. His calm tone gave her a small push, but the fear still clung to her voice. She said she wanted boundaries. She said she wanted safety. She said she didn't want pressure during the hardest months of her life. The second those words came out, Betty reacted. She blinked fast, caught between feeling defensive and wanting to understand. She asked if Julia was saying they caused stress. Julia froze. That was the moment she had dreaded. The cast exchanged uneasy glances. Brandon squeezed her hand and told her she wasn't alone. Julia swallowed hard. She knew the truth she was about to reveal would shift the entire dynamic with his parents. She lifted her face and prepared to speak, but her voice cracked before anything meaningful came out. She choked on the first syllable, covered her mouth, and took another breath. Her body was shaking now, caught between wanting to protect herself and wanting to finally be honest. Betty asked again what she meant. Her tone was quieter this time, more careful, more aware of the tension sitting between them. Julia opened her eyes and looked directly at the screen. She looked like someone stepping through fear instead of around it. And then she pushed out the only sentence she could manage, the one sentence that made every cast member lean in closer. What she says next will stop the entire conversation in its tracks, because the truth she is about to admit hits deeper than anyone expected. Julia's voice came out thin and shaky when she finally forced the words forward. She said they had been lying. The room froze. Not a dramatic TV pause, but the kind of stillness that happens when everyone realizes the conversation has moved into dangerous emotional territory. Ron blinked slowly, trying to understand. Betty leaned back with a small gasp, the kind that slips out when someone is caught off guard but doesn't know what to feel yet. Julia kept her eyes locked on the floor, like she was afraid to look at their reactions. Her shoulder rose and fell with a shaky breath. She did not take the sentence back. She let it sit there, heavy and unfiltered. Brandon stepped in gently, but his presence didn't soften anything. His eyes flicked between Julia and the screen, unsure which direction the tension would break. He knew this was the moment she feared most. He said they had kept things from them, but he didn't elaborate. Julia lifted her hand again, signaling she wanted to speak for herself. It was the first time in the entire conversation that she looked determined instead of overwhelmed. She said there were things she needed to say, but she never felt safe enough to say them. Betty's face tightened with a mix of confusion and worry. She asked what they had lied about. Her tone wasn't angry. It was tense, as if she expected something painful. That question hit Julia hard. Her whole posture wilted. She brought her hands together again and pressed her palms so tightly the skin turned pale. She said she didn't want to hurt anyone. She said she didn't want to open old wounds. She said she didn't want drama. She just wanted to feel stable while going through the hardest months of her life. Ron listened closely. He adjusted his voice to something reassuring, almost fatherly. He said he didn't want her to feel scared of them. He said they cared about her. That line made Julia's face collapse again. She wiped tears quickly, the kind of tears that come when someone hears kindness at the exact moment they expect conflict. Her reaction made Betty's expression soften slightly, but the uncertainty remained. She still didn't know what Julia was holding back. Julia lifted her head slowly and looked at the screen for the first time since she said the word lying. Her eyes were red, but steady. She said they didn't know what she had been through. She said she didn't want to face judgment. She said she didn't want anyone walking into their home unannounced during the pregnancy. She said she didn't want extra pressure on her body or her mind. The past had left scars that shaped every decision she made, even if the parents didn't realize it. A long silence hit the room again. Everyone waited for the second half of her confession, but the words were stuck. You could see them behind her eyes, pushing forward but trapped behind fear. The cast leaned closer. Brandon squeezed her knee. Ron waited with surprising patience. Betty shifted again, this time with nerves instead of sharpness. She whispered that she wanted Julia to feel comfortable with them. The tone was different. Softer, unsure, almost pleading. Julia nodded once, but her voice cracked when she tried to respond. She whispered that she didn't want to feel alone anymore. That was the closest she had come to admitting the truth she was still holding back. It wasn't the lie itself that was breaking her. It was the pressure of carrying that lie through grief, through fear, through the entire pregnancy without support. Brandon placed his hand over hers, and she let herself lean toward him. Her breathing was uneven again, but this time it came from the strain of choosing whether to keep protecting herself or finally tell them everything. She closed her eyes. Her lips trembled. She looked like she was standing on the edge of saying something that would reshape the entire family dynamic for good. The final push is moments away, and the truth she is about to reveal will land harder than anything she has admitted so far. Julia took a long breath, opened her eyes, and tried one more time to steady her voice. The truth sat right at the edge of her lips, the truth she had been terrified to say for 6 months. She looked at Brandon first, almost as if she needed his confirmation that speaking out loud wouldn't send her spiraling again. He gave a small nod, barely visible, but strong enough for her to draw strength from it. Her chest rose with one last inhale before she turned back to the screen, where Ron and Betty waited. She began to speak, but her voice cracked on the first word. She tried again. Still nothing. Her fear wasn't subtle anymore. It took form in the way her hands shook, the way her shoulders curled inward, the way her breath kept catching halfway through. She whispered that she wanted them to understand what she had been carrying. She said she needed support, not pressure. She said she hadn't known how to tell them because she feared they would react before she could even finish explaining. Ron leaned closer, his expression full of patience. He said they were listening. His tone didn't have that old sharpness. It came from a man trying to take the right step. Betty's eyes softened, though confusion still sat behind them. She asked gently what Julia meant by hiding things. Julia swallowed and tried to speak again. She said their past behavior scared her. She said she didn't want anyone walking through the door without knocking when she was already fighting to keep her body calm. She said pregnancy had turned every boundary violation into a trigger. She didn't say it with anger. She said it like someone who had reached her emotional limit. Her voice dropped even lower as she said they had been lying because she wasn't ready for their reaction. She looked up, and for the first time since the call started, she held Betty's gaze. It was a direct look, steady and fragile at the same time. She whispered that she didn't want them to think she pushed them away to be cruel. She pushed them away to survive her own fear. The room went silent again. No one breathed. Every cast member leaned forward, waiting for the next line. She opened her mouth for the final part of her confession, but before she could finish, her breath faltered, her lips trembled, tears welled up again. It was like her mind snapped back to every painful memory all at once. The pressure grew too heavy for words. She tried to force the sentence out one more time, but her throat closed around it. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking from the weight of everything she had tried to hold. Ron whispered her name, hoping to ground her. Betty looked startled, as if seeing for the first time how deep the wound ran beneath Julia's fear. Brandon wrapped an arm around her, guiding her gently against his shoulder. Her voice came out in broken pieces as she tried to finish the confession, but she couldn't push past the final wall of fear. The words dissolved into tears before she could reach the truth they had been waiting for. Production cut the moment off. The screen froze on her face. The episode ended right there, mid-sentence, leaving the entire room stunned and the audience with a knot in their chest. Julia's truth sat suspended in the silence, unfinished, raw, and heavy. This wasn't the kind of cliffhanger built for drama. It was the cliffhanger of a woman who had reached her breaking point while trying to protect herself in the only ways she knew. The cast didn't move at first. They were processing what they witnessed. Brandon held Julia tighter, whispering something the cameras couldn't catch. Ron's face showed a mix of worry and regret. Betty pressed her lips together, unsure whether to speak or stay quiet. The call ended without closure, without answers, without the relief Julia thought she might find by finally sharing her truth. Everything now hangs in the air. Their relationship, their boundaries, their next conversation, and above all, the biggest reveal of all, the pregnancy she still hadn't openly admitted to them in her own words, that part remains unsaid, waiting, heavy, unfinished. What happens when the truth finally comes out and the parents hear the words directly from her will shape everything in the next chapter of this story.